I heard from Frank that LBJ had designated Cord Meyer Jr. to undertake a larger organization while keeping it totally secret. Cord Meyer himself was a rather favored member of the Eastern aristocracy. He was a graduate of Yale University and had joined the Marine Corps during the war and lost an eye in the Pacific fighting. I think that LBJ settled on Meyer as an opportunist, Perrin like himself, Perrin, and a man who had very little left to him in life ever since JFK had taken Cord's wife as one of his mistresses. I would suggest that Cord Meyer welcomed the approach from LBJ, who was, after all, only the vice president at that time, and of course could not number Cord Meyer among JFK's admirers. Quite the contrary. As for Dave Phillips, I knew him pretty well at one time. He worked for me during the Guatemala project. He had made himself useful to the agency in Santiago, Chile, where he was an American businessman. In any case, his actions, whatever they were, came to the attention of the Santiago station chief, and when his resume became known to people in the Western Hemisphere Division, he was brought in to work on Guatemalan operations. Sturges and Morales and people of that ilk stayed in apartment houses during the preparations for the big event. Their addresses were very subject to change, so that where a fellow like Morales had been one day, you're not necessarily associated with that same address the following day. In short, it was a very mobile experience. Let me point out at this point that if I had wanted to fictionalize what went on in Miami and elsewhere during the run-up for the big event, I would have done so. But I don't want any unreality to tinge this particular story, or the information, I should say. I was a bench warmer on it, and I had a reputation for honesty. I think it's essential to refocus on what this information that I've been providing you, and you alone, by the way, consists of. What is important in the story is that we've backtracked the chain of command up through Cord Meyer and laying the doings at the doorstep of LBJ. He, in my opinion, had an almost maniacal urge to become president. He regarded JFK as he was, in fact, an obstacle to achieving that. He could have waited for JFK to finish out his term and then undoubtedly a second term. So that would have put the LBJ at the head of a long list of people who were waiting for some change in the executive branch.
So now you have 3 CIA officials who had, let's say, the means, motive, and opportunity, or some connection to kill Kennedy.
That's true.
But Johnson, as we all know, was a very corrupt president.
Yeah.
Very capable of doing evil deeds, don't you think?
Unquestionably.
Unquestionably. And if he wanted something done, he may have turned to someone like Bill Harvey,
Right.
who was also extremely corrupt
Right.
and a psycho, basically.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
I could just visualize Harvey and LBJ forming a kind of a thieves compact between them. But I think that LBJ was an opportunist, and if it was not hesitated to get rid of obstacles in his way. I think that his later career exemplified that. The vice president had the most to gain.
Yeah.
And he was in a position where he could bring in people like Kornmeyer and others of interest and get their take on different things and then in turn issue instructions. There was nobody with the leverage that LBJ had, no competitor. He was the vice president, and if he wanted to get rid of the president, and he had ability to do so by corrupting different people in CIA. And he had to do it with the limitations of CIA because there was no other group that honored, if I could use that term, honored the clandestine limitations the way CIA did. They could do something, turn their back on it, and move on to something else. It was not like a military. There was no accounting in that sense. And we know that LBJ had an unlimited ambition. And we know that he was a corrupt individual. And that the dollar sign was very important to him. As vice president, he didn't have the leverage that a president did or would. And so that was an attractive goal for LBJ. He did not want his career to come to an end as vice president. Who knows about vice presidents? It was very, very important to him that he take advantage as to the extent that he could as vice president, because just a few things had to be accomplished. He had to kill Kennedy, have him killed, I should say, and be guilt-free himself. And then he could go on and do what he wanted to do as President of the United States. It was a very tempting and almost illogical move on his part. I keep thinking about Bill Harvey, call Harvey and say, look, there are some things I want to have done. I mean, Harvey didn't want just an additional CIA salary. He wanted to move on. And LBJ could do that for him. If he were president, he couldn't do much for Harvey or anybody as vice president. That was why he used Harvey as the being available and corrupt. It was very easy for even the vice president to start working with Harvey or anybody else. Just say, I want you to do this, I want you to do that. And making sure that they had money that was not their own to do whatever the LBJ wanted to have done, so that when the president was assassinated, the vice president was right there and ready to move along. It doesn't speak well for our democracy at that particular time. Harvey was just a very strange and complicated individual. A lot of people have sort of suggested that he was, that alcohol had taken control of him. First of all, he never should have been put in that position. I don't think that he had a pristine connection with anybody. Always had a gun on him, yeah. Particularly in Rome. Harvey even carried guns into restaurants, and he would pull them out, slap them down on the table to the dismay of other diners, and then he'd settle down to an afternoon of drinking, not eating much, but because he was way overweight, but certainly drinking. He had been a deputy to Angleton and very deeply involved in counter-espionage activities.
Well, Harvey had written in a memo at one point when he was running the executive action program that he wanted to use Corsicans.
Yeah, wanted to use what?
Corsicans.
Yeah.
As hitmen. Do you think it's possible that when he was in Rome that he might have recruited a Corsican assassin to kill Kennedy?
Yes. It is possible. I mean, it's one thing to set yourself up in splendid isolation, and it's another thing to use that isolation as a tool,
Right.
so that you're not an immediate suspect in the case of a capital crime.
Right, because he was in Rome.
Is that understandable?
Yeah, very,
Okay.
very. My understanding is that Harvey had a very severe clash with Bobby Kennedy around the time of the missile crisis, and that Kennedy basically
I think it was
said, "Get rid
earlier
of
than
this
that.
guy."
And he posted an old slogan somewhere in the agency premises that said, the tree of liberty must be nourished by the blood of patriots. And this incensed Bobby Kennedy. And they clashed on that particular point. Seems ridiculous. You would think that Bobby would have embraced that particular philosophy, but he did not. And I guess he figured that Harvey was trying to steal some of the glory of whatever was going on in those days.